While we, rightfully so, look to our leaders in Congress to find solutions to the challenges facing our nation, there are many problem solvers, as Seth just referred to, working outside of the government in both the nonprofit and private sectors. Our next panel is made up of just these people, and we are excited to have them joining us this morning. To learn more about the value of cross-sector collaboration in achieving policy results, please welcome on stage Nisha Patel, Managing Director of Narrative Change and National Initiatives at the Robin Hood Foundation, a New York-based nonprofit that works to improve the living standards for 1.8 million low-income New Yorkers. Matt Bertram, Vice President of Volunteer Services with the American Red Cross, and Diana Dukas, Director of Social Responsibility with the Libra Group, an international business group with a presence in 35 countries. Previously, Ms. Dukas was the policy advisor and director of the White House Business Council under President Barack Obama. This morning's panel will be moderated by the Hill's congressional reporter, Melanie Zanona. Melanie, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and for coming out on this snowy, cold morning. Although I was telling them I'm from Chicago and this is like spring for us. But look, we have a really great panel to cap things off. And it's a really exciting time in Washington now that the dust has really settled after the midterm elections. But we also are entering an era of divided government, and it's sparked some concern about gridlock and polarization. So I think now is as good a time as any to talk about where things can actually get done. So I want to open it up to our panel. And of course, natural disasters is something that comes to mind. The California wildfires are on everyone's mind this morning. But I want to ask each of our panelists and go down the line, what are the types of challenges, issues, or problems that you find work best for cross-sector collaboration? Danny, we can start with you.
Sure. Unfortunately, there are too many. There are lots of opportunities for organizations across the board to come together. I had the fortunate opportunity when working for President Obama in the White House that there were issue after issue that we decided to bring together the nonprofit sector and the private sector, whether it was on response to the refugee crisis, whether it was on climate, whether it was on guns. And you see those issues continuing to move forward, and where you actually see the private sector and the nonprofit side actually kind of taking the lead now, when they're taking the opportunities. There's the opportunity for culture shift. There's the opportunity to rally so many resources together to come together and make change. And I think, unfortunately, there are too many, but I think the ones that I just listed are ones that continue to move across.
And Matt, especially working for Red Cross, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I agree. There are many, many opportunities. And we're seeing it right now in the disaster space. The work that we do, people think of the Red Cross immediately when you think of disaster response. What people may not know is that we lock arms with so many other organizations to deliver those services, and it relies on the partnerships and work that we create ahead of time with the government partners as well. And it's not just the disaster space. We service the armed forces. We have health and safety training, trying to do, help people get more education in schools around defibrillation and safety. So there are plenty of opportunities, and we're fortunate enough to see it in the disaster space. We were talking before this that, when we're out there serving on the front lines doing this work, folks really want to be collaborative and partners. And we do a lot of this stuff ahead of time so that when disaster does happen, like we're in North Carolina, we're in Florida, we're in California right now with big responses, and it's all possible because of collaboration with partners.
Anisha?
Yeah, I think I would, focus on the issue that we work on every day at Robin Hood, which is fighting poverty, right? That's a big issue. Big problems require big solutions, and so that requires cross-sector collaboration. And I think oftentimes we think of government, and government has a really important role to play in fighting poverty, but where's the innovation going to come from? And not to say that can't come from government, because having served in the Obama administration, that was something we tried to push, and we see that happening at the state and local level. But I think for philanthropy in particular, we have an important role to play in being that innovation capital to begin to catalyze sort of new ideas, get proof of concept that hopefully government can take up and help to scale. And simultaneously, thinking about the private sector, which we don't often think about in the poverty fight, but there's an important role to play there as well. So one of the best things we can do to fight poverty is to create access to good jobs, right? And so that requires really good, strong partnerships with the business community. And I also think there's a really important role for the faith community that we often don't talk about enough. So all of those sectors and more.
Especially with fighting poverty, it's an issue that affects different communities in different ways. How do you choose a candidate to collaborate with, and what are some of the decisions and thought process that goes into that?
You know, my lens, and I've been working on these issues in different contexts, so government, nonprofits, philanthropy, for over 20 years now. And my lens is often go where there's both opportunity and need. And it turns out everywhere in this country you will find both of those things. Now, going into a particular community, so we could take New York City, you could take Washington, D.C., where I'm based, right at the local level. Sometimes the right leadership is there in the nonprofit sector. Sometimes it's the business community. Sometimes it's government. So starting like with the willing, right, and building from there. And I think I'm a little agnostic about saying whether it has to be one sector or the other. That's really setting the table and bringing others together.
Well, and I also think on that piece specifically, there's the opportunity to just bring it together completely. So my company, the Libra Group, we are a founding sponsor of an organization called Involve Entrepreneurship, which is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to hosting an entrepreneurship competition in underserved communities. And so I agree, it starts on the ground, it starts with the willing. And so if you create the opportunity and you say, we are here to support you, we will be able to give you funding, we'll be able to give you resources, mentorship, we will help you along the way. You just have to create jobs in your community, and you have to invest in where you are so you can bring others along with you. It's bringing it together. It's identifying the willing. It is bringing, just collecting those resources and moving forward all in the same direction.
Do you encounter resistance when you come in and make those types of offers ever?
There's always a sense of skepticism. So why are you doing this? Why? Well, there are people that need help, and we have the opportunity to help them. But it's not just here you go. Here's some resource and off on your way. We want to be invested, not financially, but mentorship-wise and educationally, along with the people that we support. Because you can't just throw money at the problem and expect it to solve. You want to be a part of the solution every step of the way.
Obviously, money is a huge piece of it, though, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Matt, how does the Red Cross partner to receive funding? How does that actually work?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we immediately after disaster strikes, there's a lot of ways people can give. Again, back to technology and partnering, we're finding new ways to do that as well. You see text campaigns, you'll see we have visibility with NFL, other partnerships. But at the same time, we have this constant challenge because disaster relief happens so quickly, and raising those dollars can come very quickly. But our real problem we have at Red Cross, our challenge is the 60,000 other disasters that we respond to that people don't hear about, right? Constantly that recognition of the fact that every single night there's 1,000+ home fires across this country we respond to. So we have to find new and innovative ways. And we're talking about partnership too, back to the disaster space. We partner with companies like Walmart. They do logistics like nobody else, right? So they actually come and partner with us and sit down with us in our disaster operations center and help us work out the best way to deliver logistics. How do you get supplies? A hurricane's coming and you've got 3 or 4 states in its path. How do you get supplies, people, everything there, in time? So we rely on these partnerships all the time, not just asking corporations for financial support, but we partner with them to use their intellectual support as well. And we're finding that's a great way to help us continue to further our mission.
And how much planning is there ahead of time before disaster strikes? So you're being, sort of proactive instead of reactive. Is that even possible when it comes to natural disasters?
It absolutely is possible. Everybody at Buzz phrase, we're a learning organization, and I can say we are truly a learning organization. We go through these big disaster operations, and then we debrief and hot wash consistently. But we do have a lot of planning things. But the thing you learn, everything's different. There's always new challenges, and so you have to have established those relationships ahead of time, have the best systems in place. But the fact of the matter is, a certain percentage of your work, you just have to be agile, and people have to understand that. And again, that's where the partnerships come in. It's where the relationships with the governmental partners and the technology and expertise we gain from our partners in the business community help us do that.
Nisha, how do you identify candidates to partner with?
Yeah, we actually have a great team at Robin Hood who has expertise across different issue areas, and so much of it is based on really knowing the field, keeping up with the latest research trends around what's working, but then really knowing a community. So going back to that lens of need and opportunity, understanding where the needs are, and being sort of on the ground in communities, having those relationships, working with the nonprofit sector, with government to identify who's doing the innovative work. And so we rely a lot on our program staff to really go out in the field and to do that due diligence.
Diana, I want to talk to you. You worked in the White House. So what did you find when you were there was the best examples of where the government and the private sector could work together?
Fortunately, there were a lot. We often don't get a lot of credit for actually having a good relationship with the business community, but I like to think that we did. And so when it came around COP21 and the Paris Agreement, we had over 200 companies come together and pledge what their contributions to ending the climate crisis or addressing the climate crisis was going to be. I worked very closely on the Equal Pay Pledge, and so we had over 100 companies, both big and small, committing to transparency and to closing the gender pay gap. I mean, there were lots of opportunities for us to work together. The refugee crisis, again, was what we did, one after the other after the other. I worked very closely on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Unfortunately for us, that did not get across the line, but we had a really wonderful working relationship with the business community to try to achieve change.
Just to any of the panelists, how do you maintain those partnerships over time?
You know, I think partnerships, I think about, is going to sound kind of funny, but like any other relationship, like it requires care and feeding, right? And I think, you know, as Matt was saying, you don't just sort of call people when there's a crisis. Having those relationships built up, building that trust, understanding what you each bring to the table, so that it's not, you're not waiting to sort of that last minute when there's a need to pick up the phone. And I think having that trusted relationship built up, having the experience of having worked together, built things together. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, like in today's labor market for all of us, any number of us move across different organizations and different sectors, and I think that's actually really key. Like I think we were just sort of just talking before the panel, I think all of us have worked in different communities, but also different sectors, from government to business to nonprofit. And so having those contacts and also understanding what motivates different people. It might actually be, like, we can all say we all care about an issue, but what's going to get government to the table, business to the table, nonprofits, might be slightly different. So understanding where organizations are coming from.
I would add to that, the care and feeding, absolutely. I think that's key. And I'd almost be remiss, you know, my work now is specifically involved with volunteers, right? We have over 300,000 volunteers that work, you know, day in and day out for the Red Cross. And part of that is these partnerships ahead of time, right? You see disasters happen, we would train workforce we can send there. We have lots of people who raise their hand in the local communities and say, I want to help. But a lot of it is back to the partnerships with the business community and faith-based community. Having those relationships where we go into churches and they train folks to become responders. So when something does happen in that community, they can respond. And those are things you have to be disciplined to do in between the big events. It's easy to get done with the large event, want to take a breath and slow down. But if you go to our disaster operations control center, you're going to see, after big disaster events, you're going to see a lot of folks from outside organizations there as we're working for the next one, because that's the key, is the discipline to continue to nurture those relationships.
And I would also say it's important to figure out how to speak to one another, for the sectors to talk to one another in a shared language. Nonprofit, government, private sector, everyone has their own vernacular, and it's really easy sometimes to just get caught up in your own ecosystem and to not understand from one sector to another how to talk to one another. And if you're not investing in that relationship and how to communicate and what your needs actually are, it's actually going to provide or create a very rocky relationship, and you're not going to get all the things that you need out of it. But knowing how to talk to one another in each industry and sector is really important.
How necessary is it to have partners that share your same sort of values and to have your goals aligned? Is that a prerequisite for choosing someone to partner with?
I would say yes, because to me, values are at the highest level, right? We might disagree on specific policy ideas, but at the end of the day, I think that's what brings all of us as Americans together, right? Even if we have different political points of view, it is this idea that we, you know, for example, there are very few people that would say we shouldn't all have equal access to opportunity, that we all don't believe in both freedom and responsibility, right? And that's just the highest level of shared value. And if we can't do that, I worry.
Also, how important, maybe Deanna, you can speak to this, but how important is it to collaborate across the borders, given that so many of these issues are not just unique to the United States?
I think it's critical. I think it's absolutely important to understand that your issues are not necessarily just specific to your community. Right now, one of the nonprofits that we helped found, or that we did found, it's called the Home Project, and it's based in Athens, Greece, and it has provided, or it has built 11 shelters for unaccompanied minors affected by the migrant crisis. And we've actually recently been able to partner with IKEA Foundation, who just came in with a significant contribution to help us scale and build, but also taking what we're learning there and seeing if we can apply it to anywhere else. Obviously, this is this is a crisis that has been going on for way too long, and it is cross-border everywhere. And so being able to share best practices about what has worked for us in the home project, and then how to implement those same solutions across borders, I think is critical.
Yeah, and we're fortunate we're part of the International Red Cross. So we're one of like 200 societies. So we constantly have dialogue with our colleagues. During responses in the United States, there's often volunteers and workers from the Mexican Red Cross, Canadian Red Cross, and vice versa. You know, we have projects that we fund across the globe in Nepal, Haiti, other places. So, and it isn't just a American Red Cross helping other societies, frankly. Like most recently I met with representatives from the French Red Cross, and they came here to learn about some of the technology we use to engage volunteers. But during this conversation, I learned as much from them as they did from me. And that's one of the benefits we have, is that we all have a little bit different societies, but at the end of the day, we're all rallying around the same common goal. And problems that we have in the United States, or problems they have in other countries, oftentimes are pretty shared.
What would you say the biggest challenges in cross-sector collaboration? I mean, you hit on this a little bit with the communication, but what are some of the other things that you find are the biggest hurdles to overcome?
I would say a challenge, I think, in working with government is political wins and elections, actually, right? Because people are working with these limited time frames, like, okay, what can I get done? And I like deadlines; they can be motivating, right? But what can I get done in 2 years or 4 years? And they're very focused on that. And then you have an election and leadership, and I'm not just talking about federally; I'm talking about state and local as well, right? That initiative was an old mayor's initiative, and now there's a new mayor, an old county executive's initiative, and now there's a new one, and then people lose interest because of that, and that can be quite frustrating. I think one of the solutions to that actually is cross-sector collaboration, and so I'm thinking about just where so much of our work is at the local level. So who are those institutions that are going to be in it for the long haul, right? And so people that maybe are leading long-standing nonprofits or organizations like community foundations, like United Ways, that are a little bit less affected by these political winds, and say, we're going to take a stand on an issue. We have a goal, and we want to, sustainably move families out of poverty, or reduce child poverty, or increase the high school graduation rate. We've got a quantifiable goal, and we're going to keep working toward that. So that's another piece that I think could be helpful.
Well, especially in today's political climate, I do believe that a lot of these typically nonpartisan issues can get dragged into the fight sometimes, even with something like hurricanes, which we saw. I'm just curious, what do you guys think is the best way to avoid the political fray? When you have a challenge or an issue in the community, how can you really avoid getting bogged down by that?
Well, we have to. We're impartial. That's part of our mantra. That's part of our founding. But for us, it's about focusing and staying focused on and helping people stay focused on the problem. For us, you talk about collaboration. We work with so many governmental agencies, from the federal, state, and local, on these response plans. For us, it's about communicating ahead of time what the expectations are, what they can expect from us, what they expect from us, and what we can, expect back from them. But we have to make sure we keep people focused on the work that we have to do. So we try really, really hard. It's not always simple to stay out of those things. But I can tell you, one of the best parts, we were talking about this before, is one of the best parts of my job every day is that we're dealing with these tremendous tragedies, but Americans want to help each other. We have no shortage of people raising their hand and saying, I want to do something to help. And no one asks questions about party affiliation. They just fly across the country, go serve for 3 weeks, work 7 days a week, and come home and then thank us for that opportunity, because they got a chance to make a difference. So that's for us, is staying focused on that and staying focused on delivering that support.
And Diana, what's your perspective, having worked in an administration previously?
I think bipartisan outreach is absolutely critical, and I think you have to build that infrastructure early on, and you have to show that it is not singularly focused because of who you work for or where you're coming from, but that you actually are bringing people together. And if you can do events or press conferences and others where you're bringing in a bipartisan group of individuals, and across the board, whether it's superintendent or all the way up to your federal representatives, I think it's really critical to show that you have mass support from every level and from both sides.
I really want to dig into the idea of the public-private partnership. Of course, that was a core piece of Trump's infrastructure plan that never really got off the ground. I think there's a lot of concern about toll roads and privatization. What are the perils of P3s, and are the criticisms warranted? Anyone want to go there?
I mean, I think the opportunities outweigh the negatives. I think bringing more brains to the table who have experience in representing all the various sectors and demographics of people who would be affected by whatever change would be is far greater to bring that together and hash it out rather than the negatives. Of course, there's always the potential downside of innovation or change or things like that, but you have to look at the upside and the positive and to see if you can actually hash out those problems at the table before they start become challenges for everyday Americans.
And P3s have really evolved over the years too. It's not just tollways, right? Like, what are some other examples where you can use P3s and other sorts of cross-sector collaboration to achieve results?
One of the things I've been sort of spending some time looking at and thinking about lately is around data, which is not always the sexiest topic. It's like people's eyes tend to glaze over. But when you start to look at how much it undergirds the work all we do, so there are massive amounts of data, no matter where you're working, right? If you stop and think about it, that we're collecting in government, certainly, but in the nonprofit sector, in the private sector. And that's an area where, and we've got to be careful about privacy concerns, obviously, but the power of matching big data and what it can tell us about the impact of public and private resources working together, I think is massive. And I think there's actually been a lot more done in the private sector, and for good and bad. But I think trying to harness that in positive ways, I think, could be really powerful. So so let me try to make this a little bit more concrete, right? You think about the data that government has access to, the consumer data that companies have access to about all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, right? So what does harnessing that for good look like? Well, think about a low-income family that's trying to find affordable housing. And if you live in the Washington region, no matter what your income is, you know how challenging that can be. And what we know, right, if you talk to researchers who look at this, the zip code that any of us are born into has a huge impact on the opportunities we have access to and our trajectories later in life. And so what if a family had access to that data in a usable way? What if there were an app when you were looking for an apartment that could tell you something, this harnessing data that exists today, about where there's affordable housing, so not, based on your income, that your family could live, that also provides access to good school districts, access to good jobs, and good transportation routes. So those data all exist, but it's not put, and think about the phones we all carry around in our pockets. The amount of data that's there that just wasn't even probably conceivable to any of us 10 years ago. And sure, we use it to purchase things and to make restaurant reservations. And I think for middle income and higher income people, that's sort of an everyday thing. But I'm not sure that those benefits are happening across the economic spectrum.
My last question is, of course, we heard from the leaders of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus earlier today, but the President and Nancy Pelosi have talked of bipartisanship. So how much hope is there right now that there will be opportunities for collaboration and results in the new year, in the new Congress?
Let me start with the local level move up, because I think there's, no matter what's happening nationally, at the local level on the ground where the rubber hits the road, I'm always optimistic. And then I will say I'm an American, so by nature I am optimistic. And so I hold out hope for this next Congress.
Matt, Diana?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist as well. As I was talking about, I get to see every single day, people really wanting to help folks and lock arms together. I just think underneath it, there's that spirit. People really want to be there and help each other, and I'm an eternal optimist on that.
Same. I think we have to. I think it's really critical to at least try, and I think you saw a lot of the races that were won. Many of the campaigns were very issue specific. They were district specific. I'm going to work for my constituents on X issue. And I think that's the only way to deliver, is to work together.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it on a nice bipartisan note. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.